we're in week 10 of our class and we're in chapter 9. So we're going to look at the foundations of interpersonal relationship, stages, theories, and communication. So the first thing we're going to talk about are the stages of relationships. But before we jump into the actual stages, we need to understand a couple of things. And the first is that relationships are created and constructed by individuals. That means there's certain things that we do or think about our relationships that influence it. A single relationship actually consists of multiple relationships. So in the textbook, it gives you the example of two people that are involved in a relationship. The first person's name is Pat, the second person's name is Chris. So the several relationships are this. The first is the relationship that Pat sees. The second is the relationship that Chris sees. And they're not going to see it the same. They're going to see it differently because they're different individuals. The third relationship is the one that Pat wants and is striving for. And then the fourth one is the relationship that Chris wants. But there's even more. The way that your mother views your relationship is going to actually influence your relationship. She's going to see a much different relationship than actually you will see. Your father will see a different relationship than you will see because they're not interacting with that other person. They're not romantically involved, so they're going to see it different. The way your best friend sees your relationship is going to be different. The way your coworkers see your relationship is going to be different. So that's what that means when there's multiple relationships, because the identity of your relationship depends on who's viewing it and who's thinking about it. Last but not least, relationships occur in stages that we develop towards intimacy, and eventually, if they don't last until we die, there's some kind of disillusion that is involved. So that's what we're going to look at now, is the actual stages. So we're going to begin with stage 1, and there's 6 stages. So stage 1 is the contact stage. And here is where we will first have a perceptual contact. And perceptual contact is you see, hear, you smell the person. So somebody's far across the room at a party and you see them and you go, ooh, wow. Or you may have your back to somebody and you feel somebody walking up behind you and you may think, oh my gosh, I love the smell of that person. And then you turn around to see who it is. So that's perceptual. Interactional is where you actually make your small talk. You engage in kind of those openers that we talked about in the conversation chapter last week. And you begin to find out, well, within these first 4 minutes of interacting with somebody, that's when you're going to make your decision on whether or not you want to have a relationship with them. So 4 minutes, that's all you've got. So maybe you should practice putting your best foot forward in just 4 minutes, see what you can come up with. The next stage, stage 2, is the involvement stage. And this is where we become to feel connected to each other. And there's 2 ways that we do this. The first is experimenting or testing, and that's just whether your initial judgment or those first impressions that you gained in the contact stage, you're testing to see if those were accurate. You're also asking them more questions. You're trying to get to know them better. You're also going to increase the amount of time you spend, but you're also going to even give them gifts and then increase your attractiveness, and you're going to probably go some places together. And when you go those places, you may do things like flirting with other people, flirting with each other. But when you flirt with other people, you may be testing to see, are they jealous and how much do they really like me, depending upon their jealousy. Whether or not that's ethical, we're not going to discuss that, but that's what happens in stage 2. Next, we have stage 3, and this is the intimacy stage, and this is where you commit to a relationship. You are identifiable as a couple. You talk about the relationship in terms of a relationship, our relationship. You share social networks. That means you know each other's families, you know each other's friends. And then there will be a time where you make an interpersonal commitment to each other, and that's when you say, do you want to be my girlfriend? Do you want to be my boyfriend? That's the interpersonal commitment at the dating stage. And then social bonding, where then you go out and you introduce your boyfriend or girlfriend to your friends as this is my boyfriend John, this is my girlfriend Mary. You even will go and then introduce to family and so on. So the interpersonal commitment has to come first. You guys agree to be dating, and then social bonding is where you go then meet the families. At that point, when you've met friends and family, now you're sharing those social networks. You may have those friends as your friends. Those family members may be people that you're actively involved in. So the important thing to note is that when you're dating, your interpersonal commitment is different than when you're, let's say, engaged. So there's kind of two commitments. One would be a dating commitment. One would be an engagement. Social bonding in the dating sequence where you've just agreed to become boyfriend and girlfriend, that would be going out and introducing each other. But in a marriage situation, that is social bonding as well. So it just depends on the relationship. Intimacy is a stage that can last years and years and years. So if you're dating and then you get married, my guess is you're stuck in that intimacy stage from the time you agreed to start dating until the time that your marriage begins and is going well. When your marriage or your relationship does not seem to be going well, you've entered the deterioration phase. And these are the weakening of the bonds that have held you together up until this point. Notice the difference in terms here. The first bullet under stage 4 says intrapersonal dissatisfaction. And that means that you begin to be dissatisfied with your interactions with the other person. You may also start to really come up with things about this other person that drive you nuts, and you start to focus on their flaws and how much you fight and how frustrating it is to talk to them, and you become very dissatisfied. The other person doesn't know yet. You have just been evaluating, and your evaluation has been, I'm very dissatisfied. At the point when you tell the other person, this is how I'm feeling and we need to do something about it, that's when the interpersonal deterioration comes into play. And I hope that wasn't confusing there. The interpersonal deterioration is where you do start to become farther and farther apart, and now you can see it's on both sides, not necessarily one side. So when the deterioration or the dissatisfaction is on both sides and both partners are, again, sharing less of their free time, there's more awkward silences, there's less contact, there's less sharing, all of things like that. Even this distance that you can't even put your finger on, that's interpersonal deterioration. So at that point, when you say to the other person, you know, we need to do something to help our relationship. You've entered the repair stage, and when you're asking them, we need to go to counseling, or you're saying, do you want to work this out? That's interpersonal repair. So the second bullet right there, that's interpersonal repair. When you've asked them, maybe we should go to counseling. Do you want to work this out? Maybe we should sit down and talk about these issues and write some things down to help us repair our relationship. Intrapersonal repair is the step that people don't like. And it's the step that people usually skip. And that is the detriment of the relationship. In intrapersonal repair, you begin to analyze what's going wrong. You begin to say, I need to change my behavior. So often we skip to interpersonal repair because we say, well, it's not me, it's them. I mean, I'm not doing anything. It's them. If they would not do these 20 things that are driving me nuts, I would feel better and our relationship would not be in disintegration. Well, that's never the case. You are always part of the problem. Always, always, always. The fact that the other person is more of a problem, which I always hear from people, cracks me up because you have no control over that other person. The only person you have control over is yourself. So if you want to repair your relationship, it should start with you. And that means you try to figure out what's going wrong. What are you doing to make things go wrong? And you have to change your behavior or change your expectations of that other person, because sometimes we just expect too much. People can't deliver. I know that that's one of my flaws, is that I expect too much out of my husband instead of being more realistic about what he can do. So now we enter into the disillusion stage, and this is where repair has not worked. And now the bonds are going to be broken. They're no longer loosening. They are broken completely. And now I'm going to start to see myself as an individual. I'm not part of that couple anymore. And you're going to have interpersonal separation, which means you will either move out if you've been living together. You may stop spending time together. You don't go places together anymore. And then that would be the social or public separation. We also can sometimes continue to kind of live psychologically like we are still in that couple. And that's an okay thing to do for a certain time period. I say anything longer than 2 or 3 months of kind of having that psychological mindset that you're still part of that couple would probably be adequate time. Anything longer than that, you might need to go get some help from a counselor. But it also depends on how long the relationship was. If it was a 20 or 30-year-old marriage, well, 2 to 3 months of not thinking of yourself as you've thought of yourself for 20 or 30 years, that seems a little bit unrealistic. But there should be a time limit on that psychological thinking that you daydream about being with them, you think about the good times, you do all of that thing, because it does get to be a little bit of a burden.